Methodist Church. I am Pastor Mark KIlbourne. Today we are celebrating Pentecost, when we saw the beginning of the church as well as the coming of the Holy Spirit. We join together in worshiping God and lifting up His name so the world may see God's glory. So join with us today as we worship our Holy Spirit. I invite you to hear the word of the Lord that is taken from Acts chapter 2, verses 1 through 13. When the day of Pentecost arrived, they were all together in one place. And suddenly there came from heaven a sound like a mighty rushing wind, and it filled the entire house where they were sitting. And divided tongues as of fire appeared to them and rested on each one of them. And they were all filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit gave them utterance. Now there were dwelling in Jerusalem Jews, devout men from every nation under heaven. And at this sound the multitude came together, and they were bewildered, because each one was hearing them speak in his own language. And they were amazed and astonished, saying, Are not all of these who are speaking Galileans? And how is it that we hear, each one of us, his own language? Parthians and Medes and Elamites and residents of Mesopotamia, Judea and Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia, Egypt and parts of Libya belonging to Cyrene, and visitors from Rome, both Jews and proselytes, Cretans and Arabians. We hear them telling in our own tongues the mighty works of God. And all were amazed and perplexed, saying to one another, What does this mean? But others mocked, saying, They are filled with new wine.
voice calling out.
When I was in my senior year of high school, I attended a rather boisterous church in Kingsport, Tennessee that was known for its charismatic flair. This church was aimed at young adults and youth. It was the place where teenagers could go for Christian rock concerts, as well as the fact that they owned the local Christian rock station. It was during this time that I actually traveled with them to Wilmore, Kentucky for my first experience with Ichthus as a rock festival as well. I also attended a Bible study with some of the members that were there. These members were not that much older than I was, and it was a very influential period in my life. This particular time, I came into contact with the charismatic belief system. And this belief system believes in practicing the gifts of the Spirit. And this particular church practiced those gifts abundantly. They spoke in tongues, they prophesied, they prayed for healing, and they had this desire to see miracles performed during their services. Many people would also talk about the experiences of the services as well. You would see people slain in the Spirit, you would see people dancing in the aisles, and this was a part of their worship service. You could easily say, as they said many times, this was not a dead church. Many people think of this style of church when they consider Pentecost and the Holy Spirit. They associate this loud and boisterous style with our third part of the Trinity. When we think of the Holy Spirit, we always kind of pause. Pause because there is a mystery that surrounds the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit seems to be the least defined person in the Trinity. 2 whole paragraphs are given to God the Father and God the Son, but only one small statement is given to the Holy Spirit when you talk of the Apostles' Creed. Throughout history, the Holy Spirit likewise got little fanfare. The biggest part of history that concerns the Holy Spirit is when the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church divided over the Filioque controversy. All of this probably adds somewhat to the Holy Spirit's appeal. That there is a mystery that surrounds this third part of the Trinity, this person who we worship. The Spirit becomes associated with extraordinary things like miracles and the greatness of God. This should not surprise us whenever we begin to think about the Holy Spirit, especially when we see the main experience of the Holy Spirit in the Bible, which is the passage we read this morning, and it is rather a flashy story. It begins rather simply. The disciples are gathered in an upper room not long after Jesus has ascended into heaven, and there they are praying and meditating with one another. And it is there that suddenly a sound comes like a mighty rushing wind, and appearing above each of the disciples' head is something that looks like a flame that is present in their lives. And then they begin to speak. But they spoke not in their own language, but in languages that were other than theirs. The presentation that is given in this particular story is different from what we experience now in modern day churches, as well as apparently what was experienced in the First Corinthian church. In the First Corinthian church, we see Paul confronting the Corinthians as they are speaking in tongues. And apparently what is being spoken is more of a prayer language. It may be a language that other people understand. It may not be a language that other people understand. And this added to some controversy and chaos in the worship services, and Paul calls for moderation of that service. But here in Acts, it's very different. Here in Acts, we see that the languages that are spoken when the Holy Spirit falls upon the disciples are languages that other people understand. They are amazed to hear their own language being spoken before them. What is even more amazing is that it's the Galileans that are spoken. The Galileans could easily be referred to as the hillbillies of the New Testament. They were the individuals that people looked down upon. And let me see if I can kind of give this illustration of an effect upon my own life. I am a Northeast Tennessean, Southwest Virginian, and I definitely have a Northeast Tennessee accent. I've never really thought that much about it. I have cousins and other family members who have a much thicker accent than mine. But when I went off to college, I began to quickly notice that difference, and really it was other people that began to point it out, and they would notice that I did not speak like them. For the most part, my accent did not affect my academics or any of my relationships, except for on a handful of occasions. On one of those occasions, a friend of mine and I were taking psychology classes at the same time in the year, but under different professors. And it just so happened that when we got our final grade, I received an A while my friend received a lower grade, and he became angry that I, who spoke with a hillbilly accent, received a higher grade than he did. The reality is I do sound like a hillbilly at times. In fact, as Jeff Foxworthy has fondly said, I are one. I can tell you what a holler is. I can tell you what ranch tastes like. I can tell you how to fix a mess of creasy greens. I can even tell you what a dry land fish is. But just because I sound like a hillbilly and just because I probably am a hillbilly, it doesn't mean that I can't have a knack for psychology. In the same way, the individuals that were hearing the Galileans speak were amazed to hear their own tongues being spoken by individuals that they would have considered less educated. But there is something about this particular aspect excuse me, of this part of the story. It is a statement that the Holy Spirit is going beyond these Galileans. He is going beyond these visitors. He's going beyond the residents of Jerusalem as well, to basically display the power of God and to let them know that they are in the presence of something that is greater than they are. Often when we see God, God will often do this to show us that He is greater than ourselves, that we are called to depend upon Him and to remember His greatness. When we look throughout the Bible, we do see the Holy Spirit on display so many times. We see His presence there in Genesis at the beginning of the creation story. We see it through prophecies. The Spirit has been moving and has always been moving. It is this miraculous part, though, that often causes us to overlook what is the Spirit's greatest work in humanity's life. In 1 Corinthians chapter 12, Paul discusses the gifts of the Spirit extensively. And he lists these both in 1 Corinthians 12 and in Romans 12. He helps us to remember those great miracles that are present in the gifts of the Spirit. Speaking in tongues, prophesying, healing. Of course, there are other mundane ones that he lists, helping and giving and administrating. But it's interesting at the end of 1 Corinthians chapter 12, Paul tells the Corinthians that he will show them a more excellent way. Now, if you're familiar, chapter 12 is followed by chapter 13. And in chapter 13, we call it the love chapter. And this is that more excellent way. Paul begins with these words, "If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am but a noisy gong and a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all the miracles and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. And if I give away all that I have, and I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing." We often pass over those words, but those words should really grab a hold of our attention because they all relate back to those gifts of the Spirit. And Paul is saying that most excellent way is love. That all those gifts of the Spirit serve love in and of themselves. But it's the next words that I think really challenge us. In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 4, Paul says, "Love is patient." How many of us pause there? Love is kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. Those words should grab a hold of us, because I have a feeling that most of us struggle with those statements. Love is hard. It is not easy. I don't know too many of us that are patient, and yet that's the first word that Paul uses to describe love. Love challenges us to go beyond ourselves. It's interesting that chapter 13 is primarily read at marriages. But chapter 13 of 1 Corinthians was not written for marriages. It was written for the church. It was written for all Christians. Most of us really need to understand we need help in loving. In John chapter 16, Jesus is preparing the disciples for his eventual departure. In verse 7, he tells them that he is sending someone else to come, the helper. In the Greek, this word is paraclete. And paraclete means someone who comes up alongside us and helps us. The Holy Spirit comes into the middle of our lives and helps us, and really helps us to love. The change that is coming in our lives, the great miraculous power of God, is that the Holy Spirit is helping us to become more loving. To change our hearts so that we move away from looking and saying, what's in it for me, to saying, what's in it for you. And basically looking to reach out and love someone else. Today, as we celebrate Pentecost, I invite you into this season to allow God to move in your heart so that God can help us to become more loving and more like God. Amen.